Midnight pressed down on Harbor City with a hand as heavy as the storm. Rain battered the cracked sidewalks, filled the gutters with oily rivers, washed the city clean for a moment, and then left it lonelier than before. Headlights blurred in the downpour, and distant sirens were swallowed by thunder. In a narrow police cruiser that smelled faintly of wet nylon and old coffee, Detective Haley Cooper leaned her forehead against the glass, listening to the erratic drumming above. Beside her, Ranger, her partner in fur and in heart, shifted on the back seat. The German shepherd's sable coat was streaked with darker shadows from the night. Rainwater dripped from the scar notched in his left ear, and his chest rose and fell, slow and even, in a rhythm that reminded Haley to breathe. The radio crackled. "Routine patrol, District 5, alley check." Haley answered with the sort of calm that comes from exhaustion, flicked on the overhead lights, and nudged the car forward through the maze of streets she'd known for a decade. Tonight was just another night in a city that never truly slept, though some nights Haley wished it would. The city outside was a collage of old brick, neon halos, and the silent gaze of broken windows. On 3rd and Ash, Ranger stirred. At first it was subtle, a tension in his frame, the way his ears pricked toward something Haley couldn't see. Then his body stiffened, every muscle taut. His nose pressed against the cracked glass. A low whine, so soft she almost missed it, vibrated through the silence. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was asking for trust. Haley's heart squeezed, a memory surfacing of another storm, another night, a life almost lost. She slowed the car, rolled to the curb, and followed Ranger's gaze into the alley, where trash bins overflowed with the remnants of 100 unseen lives. She opened her door, the rain immediately soaking through her jacket, and unclipped Ranger's lead. "Show me," she whispered. But Ranger was already moving. Shoulders hunched, tail low, every inch of him a map of urgency. The city's noise dulled beneath the weight of the storm. Haley's boots splashed through puddles littered with plastic wrappers and glass. Ranger's paws were silent, his head lowered, nose close to the ground. Suddenly he stopped, froze so completely that Haley almost collided with him. He let out a sharp, urgent bark that cut through the thunder. There, beneath a broken fire escape, was a small backpack. Blood stained the fabric, and beside it, half buried in wet newspaper, was a child's shirt. Haley's fingers shook as she knelt. She found a battered toy rabbit, one ear missing, fur stiff with mud. The smell of copper, rain, and something achingly innocent filled her lungs. Ranger whined, pressed his head against her shoulder. Not comfort, a plea. Lightning flickered, illuminating the alley in stark relief. Haley rose, senses raw. Something moved deeper in the dark. A sound barely there, almost erased by the rain, the muffled sob of a child, lost and afraid. Haley's chest ached with recognition. She remembered the taste of fear, remembered being small and unheard. She glanced down at Ranger. He met her eyes, his own wide and shining. No hesitation. He stepped forward, muscles quivering with conviction, and pulled gently on the leash. "Go on, partner," Haley whispered. Her voice was swallowed by the storm, but it was enough. They moved together, woman and dog, deeper into the shadows. Each step forward felt like a promise made and kept, the promise that this time someone would not be left behind. Somewhere behind them, a siren wailed, a distant echo, too late but not useless. Ranger pressed on, undeterred, pulling Haley into the night that would change everything, The storm, for a moment, felt lighter, and in the darkness beneath the bruised sky, hope flickered. Just enough. The world behind Haley and Ranger faded with every step deeper into Harbor City's unseen veins. Rain still hammered the cracked pavement, pooling in low spots, turning alleyways into a network of shifting, uncertain mirrors. Somewhere, a neon sign flickered blue over a closed laundromat, casting the walls in ghostly light. Haley's hands trembled, not from cold, but from something older, a sense of urgency she couldn't shake. Ranger pressed ahead, nose low, fur slicked against his ribs. Each stride was purposeful, deliberate, as if the storm and the chaos around them couldn't touch the singular mission he carried. He paused only to test the air, sniffing where puddles met the bloodied edge of a sneaker print, then surged on. The leash a silent tether that bound hope and fear together. Haley followed, boots splashing, heart racing. Somewhere in the city, a child was missing. She felt the old ache rise, an echo of her own childhood, lost in shadows, unseen by adults who meant well but never looked closely enough. She let Ranger lead. He had always known how to find what others missed. Trash cans overflowed, their contents beaten flat by the rain. Windows glowed in the distance, reminders that life went on for some while others vanished without sound. Ranger stopped abruptly near a broken fence. He sniffed, ears twitching, tail rigid. Haley knelt beside him, the scent of blood sharp and metallic. A tiny smear on the fence post, half washed away. Muddy footprints, small, unsteady, trailed beyond, disappearing into a narrow passage between abandoned garages. Haley's breath steamed in the night air. She reached out, pressing her palm to the cold wood, grounding herself. Ranger let out a low, anxious whine. The storm had driven everyone indoors, leaving the streets deserted, each echo magnified until it felt like the city itself was holding its breath. The footprints grew fainter, half swallowed by water and debris. Ranger's focus never wavered. He darted beneath a sagging clothesline strung with forgotten shirts, paused to listen, then pulled sharply toward a narrow staircase descending to a boarded-up basement. The lock had been snapped, fresh, edges still glinting in the lightning. Haley's heart thudded. She tested the handle. Ranger's hackles rose, he growled, a sound that vibrated in her chest. She eased the door open. Darkness pressed in, heavy and close. The air was thick with rot and mildew. And beneath it, a thread of something sour, fear, sweat, the residue of old pain. Her flashlight beam found a path through the gloom. Ranger moved ahead, muscles bunched, posture low and alert. The narrow stairs creaked with their weight. At the bottom, amid broken chairs and spilled trash, 3 small figures huddled together, barely conscious, limbs tangled in old rope. A little girl, her hair matted, face streaked with dirt, clung to a battered toy rabbit. Her eyes were wide, but dry. Beside her, 2 younger boys, shivering, pressed close for warmth. Haley knelt, voice soft. She didn't ask questions, didn't promise more than she could give. Her hands worked methodically at the knots, fingers numb but steady. Ranger circled them, positioning himself between the children and the darkness beyond. Every so often, he looked back at Haley, a silent reassurance, a check that she was still there, still fighting. The little girl's grip tightened on the rabbit. She didn't speak, just held on as if letting go might mean slipping away for good. Haley remembered that kind of silence. The silence of kids who had already learned too much about being left behind. She untied the last knot, checked each child for injuries. Ranger's body stilled, ears cocked. Haley followed his gaze. Somewhere beyond the stairwell, a shadow shifted. Quick, purposeful, dangerous. The air changed, prickling with threat. Haley gathered the children close. Ranger moved to the base of the stairs. Hackles raised, teeth bared but silent. The little girl clung to his fur, whispering into the storm, "Don't leave me." For a moment, time seemed to stop. The only sound was the heavy rhythm of Ranger's breathing, the soft whimpers of the boys, the distant pulse of sirens riding the wind. Haley pressed the children behind her, keeping her body between them and the unknown. She thought of all the times she'd wished someone would do the same for her. Then, footsteps above. Heavy, hesitant. Ranger's body tensed, every sense alive. Haley's mind raced, calculating, no backup. The storm slowing everything. Every choice mattered. She drew the children toward the door, moving slowly, quietly, hoping the rain would mask their retreat. Ranger stayed behind, eyes locked on the darkness, muscles quivering with the need to protect. Outside, the alley was somehow brighter, the rain shining like silver. Haley hustled the children beneath an awning, pulling her radio free. Her voice shook, but her words were clear, measured. 3 children located. Need medical. Possible suspect on premises. Her hands steadied as she counted heads, checked for injuries, wrapped her own coat around the smallest boy. The little girl looked up at her, then at Ranger, and for the first time, her face softened. She reached for his leash, her words almost lost in the storm. "Don't leave me." Haley squeezed her hand. "We're here." Behind them, Ranger stared into the darkness, unblinking. A sentinel against all that still threatened. The storm, relentless as it was, could not wash away the hope flickering in that alley, a hope that grew brighter with every life pulled from the shadows. Somewhere, a distant siren wailed. This time, it was answered. Dawn broke quietly over Harbor City, the rain having spent itself through the long, black hours. The clouds, heavy and gray, lingered low above the rooftops, muting the morning into a world of softened edges. Streetlights blinked off, their glow replaced by the pale wash of early light filtering through dirty windows. In this hush, everything seemed more exposed. Puddles filled with cigarette butts, an abandoned shoe, the distant clatter of a garbage truck beginning its lonely rounds. Haley sat on the edge of her narrow bed, uniform jacket draped over her knees, wet and stained from the night before. The smell of rainwater and mud lingered in the air, mixed with the faint, comforting musk of dog fur. Across the room, Ranger lay curled on an old towel, his head tucked against his chest, breathing deep and slow. His paws twitched now and then, chasing dreams that made no sound. The house was small, tucked at the end of a quiet block where neighbors rarely waved, where porch lights flickered out before midnight and no one lingered on their steps. Here, the world slowed. Here, silence was not emptiness, but rest, a place where wounds, if not healed, might at least be left unjudged. Haley's hands shook as she unbuttoned her shirt. Bruises bloomed across her ribs, reminders of how close the night had come to going wrong. She thought of the children, 3 faces framed by dirt and fear, how their eyes had tracked every movement, silent with the weight of knowing too much. The memory settled in her chest, heavy as stone. In the kitchen, a kettle whistled softly. Haley poured water into a chipped mug, watching steam spiral upward, catching the morning light. Ranger stirred, lifting his head. His eyes found hers across the small room, questioning, patient, unchanged. There was no judgment there, only presence, only the soft thump of his tail as he waited for her to begin the day. Haley crouched, fingers brushing the rough fur along Ranger's shoulder. In that gesture, 1,000 words unspoken. Gratitude, apology, relief. He pressed his head into her palm, warmth radiating through her bones. No one watching would call it a victory, but it was survival. 2 lives bound together by memory and need. Outside, a neighbor's screen door slammed. The sound startled a crow into flight, its wings scattering drops from a sagging gutter. Haley moved to the window, watching as the city yawned awake. An old man shuffling past with his dog, a mother hustling 2 children along the cracked sidewalk. None of them looked up. Each was wrapped in their own private weather. Her phone buzzed, a terse message from the station. Take the morning. Debrief at noon. Haley set the phone aside, glad for the quiet. She let Ranger out into the backyard, where the grass was thick with water and the air smelled of pine needles and earth. The dog sniffed along the fence line, careful, as if checking for danger even here in the safety of home. He stopped by a patch of mud, nose twitching, tail still. A squirrel watched from the power line overhead. Neither moved for a long time. Haley watched, arms crossed, her breath fogging the glass. She tried to remember the last morning that felt safe, the last time she'd woken without some echo of last night's fear tracing the edges of her thoughts. She couldn't. Maybe that kind of peace was a myth, something told to children before the world asked too much of them. She brewed a second cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and listened to the rhythms of Ranger's movements outside. The scrape of claws on brick, the soft, rhythmic huff as he circled the yard. When he returned, paws muddy, he waited at the door, eyes bright, carrying the story of his morning in the burrs and dew clinging to his legs. Haley toweled him off without speaking. The room was filled with the sound of fabric on fur, the dog's low, contented sighs. She let her hands linger, tracing the line of his spine, feeling the rise and fall of each breath. His heart beat steady, anchoring her in the present. In that quiet, the worst of the night's memories lost their sharpness. The children would be safe, at least for today. Medical staff had arrived in time. The suspect had vanished, swallowed up by rain and city, but for once, it didn't feel like failure. The girl had clung to Ranger's leash until the last possible moment, whispering to him, her words lost in the dawn. Haley didn't ask what she said. Some things were for the living to keep, and for the wounded to heal with, if they could. After breakfast, Haley pulled on her boots and sat beside Ranger on the worn carpet by the window. She watched the world outside move on, traffic building, clouds shifting. Ranger leaned his weight against her, eyes half closed, content to simply exist in the soft boundary between night and day, sorrow and solace. No hero's welcome waited, no applause. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of an old wall clock, and the steady companionship of a dog who never asked for more than presence. In the hush that followed crisis, Haley let herself breathe, slow and careful, and let the morning mend what it could. And outside, Harbor City went on, as it always had. Tired, battered, quietly alive. Some wounds faded, others did not. But for one morning, in one small house at the end of a forgettable street, there was rest, and that, sometimes, was enough. Harbor City at midday was a patchwork of movement and quiet. Traffic lights ticking, clouds shifting, distant horns echoing across faded brick. Yet on the far edge of the city, inside a house where the blinds stayed half-closed against the world, time seemed to slow. Dust drifted through the window's pale light, settling on stacks of unopened mail and a chipped mug left cooling by the sink. The silence here was dense, protective, as if nothing loud or sharp could cross the threshold. Haley drifted through the small rooms with the measured steps of someone who'd learned to tread softly, even in her own space. The ache from the night before had faded to a dull bruise. Shoulders, ribs, memory. She kept her phone muted, screen face down on the counter, unwilling to let the outside world reclaim her too soon. Ranger lay sprawled in a patch of sun by the back door, tail occasionally thumping in response to some dream or memory only he knew. Haley stood at the window, mug in hand, watching as a pair of neighborhood children chalked clumsy stars and smiley faces onto the wet sidewalk. Their laughter, thin as birdsong, drifted through the glass. For a moment, she envied their ease. The world would come for them soon enough, but for now, their games drew boundaries against the future, soft and fragile, but real. Inside, the air carried the scent of dog and coffee and a trace of antiseptic from the first aid kit still open on the table. Haley absently pressed a finger to the bruise on her ribcage, then traced the small line of a scar, one of many, that marked her skin with old stories. Some wounds closed cleanly. Others lingered, thin and invisible, blooming whenever the mind circled back. Ranger shifted, rolling onto his back, paws stretched toward the ceiling. The fur along his belly was thinner, softer, marked with pale lines where old injuries had healed imperfectly. Haley crouched beside him, letting her palm rest on the slow, certain rise of his chest. He opened one amber eye, blinked, then thumped his tail once against the floor. There was no urgency in his gaze, no question, just the deep, animal knowing that sometimes all the world required was presence. The kitchen clock ticked toward noon. Haley forced herself to eat half a sandwich, the bread stale, the lettuce already wilting at the edges. Ranger watched from his patch of sun, head tilted, ears pricked not for food, but for the shift in her mood. He had always known before she did when a shadow would pass, when memory would press its weight behind her eyes. She wandered through the house, touching the things that told her own story. A faded photograph, an old police academy sweatshirt folded over the back of a chair, a collection of battered novels lined up unevenly on a shelf. In every room, Ranger's quiet followed her, steady and unobtrusive, as if he had mapped her patterns and decided that watchfulness was its own kind of devotion. Outside, the rain started again, tapping softly on the windows, blurring the view until the world looked distant, half-remembered. Haley sat on the floor beside Ranger, back against the door. She traced the contour of his ears, the notched scar along the edge, her touch feather-light. He blinked, leaned closer, his breath warm on her wrist. In that small circle of warmth, the house grew smaller, the city farther away, the ache of last night shrinking to a point she could nearly ignore. The hours unfolded quietly. Haley filled the time with small tasks, washing out Ranger's water bowl, sorting mail she would never answer, sweeping crumbs from beneath the kitchen table. She moved slowly, careful not to break the hush that held the day together. Each motion was deliberate, grounding. The scrape of a chair, the creak of a floorboard, the muffled click of claws on linoleum. Sometimes, she remembered the children, The way the little girl had pressed her cheek to Ranger's fur. The way her hands trembled even after rescue. The hollow behind her eyes. Haley wondered where they were now. Wondered if safety felt real to them yet, or if it ever would. She did not call to check, not out of indifference, but out of respect for the slow, private work of healing. Some things couldn't be hurried by kind words or official assurances. In the late afternoon, the rain slackened. Light spilled gold and uncertain through the west-facing window, illuminating the dust and the lines on Haley's face. She lay down on the rug beside Ranger, cheek pressed to the warmth of his body. He shifted, curling around her as if to shield her from whatever the world might still want. A car door slammed somewhere down the block. Voices drifted on the air, sharp and fleeting. Haley's body tensed for an instant, then eased as the noise faded. She exhaled, eyes closing, her hand resting on Ranger's steady heartbeat. She did not need to speak for him to understand the gratitude, the apology, the silent promise that for this hour at least, she would not leave. Not him, not herself. The world outside spun on. Time moved, relentless. But in the hush, in the measured breath of a tired dog and a woman learning day by day to forgive her own scars, something gentle persisted. What lingered in the silence was not absence, but a kind of hope. Thin, fragile, real. And for a while longer, that was enough. The first blue of dusk stretched across Harbor City like a fresh bruise. Lights blinked on in fractured patterns, porch bulbs glowing, neon signs buzzing alive, the pulse of a city waking for another long night. The rain had passed, but the air clung with the damp of everything unspoken, every secret the city tried to bury under its asphalt skin. Haley stepped out with Ranger as the day faded, both of them changed by the hush of the afternoon. The house felt smaller behind her. Every detail, the warm patch of sunlight where Ranger napped, the dented water bowl, the clean lines of her uniform hanging by the door, held a new gravity. She closed the door quietly, as if not to disturb something fragile left inside. The sidewalk was littered with new puddles and a film of light catching every uneven stone. Haley walked with measured strides, Ranger at her side, his leash loose in her hand, but the connection taut and sure. They passed silent windows where old lace curtains hid the world, front steps lined with clay pots and chipped paint, a row of parked cars gleaming wet under the street lamps. They moved through the neighborhood not as enforcers, not even as sentries, but as part of the quiet rhythm. Two figures known by silhouette alone, marking their place by presence, not authority. Ranger's nose worked the air, ears flicking to small noises, wings in the gutter, a clatter of silverware in a kitchen. A child's laughter muffled behind a fence, every sense alive, but at peace. At the corner of 9th and Decker, a battered truck idled at the curb. The driver, a middle-aged man with weary hands and a ball cap frayed by years of sunlight, unloaded crates of produce for the family store. He glanced up as Haley passed. Their eyes met, just a flicker, not a greeting, not quite suspicion, just a silent agreement to see and be seen. Ranger paused, head cocked, then moved on, his paws whispering against the slick concrete. A pair of teenagers huddled beneath the bus shelter, the glow of their phones painting their faces in strange, shifting colors. One of them looked up, expression wary but curious. Haley offered a nod. The girl gave a small smile in return, almost surprised by her own response. It was these unremarkable moments, that stitched Haley back into the fabric of the city. She felt the small aches in her body, the aftertaste of the night's old fear. but also something steadier rising to meet it. The comfort of Ranger's solid warmth at her side. The certainty that no one, herself included, was truly invisible here. As they crossed into the shadow of the elevated train tracks, a distant siren lifted, thin and far off. Haley stopped, the hairs at the back of her neck prickling with the echo of memory. She closed her eyes, listening, not for the danger, but for what came after. The hush, the return to ordinary life, the slow, careful regaining of trust. Ranger nudged her leg, soft and insistent. She crouched, brushing her fingers along the ridge of his jaw, the notched scar on his ear. For a moment, they just breathed together, two survivors in the quiet aftermath. When she stood, Haley noticed an old woman watching them from the stoop of a weathered apartment. The woman's hair was a gray halo in the dusk, her cardigan buttoned askew. At her feet, a shallow bowl of water waited for the neighborhood's strays. She nodded toward Ranger, approval in her tired eyes, as if she recognized some story in his carriage, some proof that kindness could persist even after being lost. They moved on, letting the city close behind them, street by street. Haley felt the energy shift as they neared the heart of the district. Traffic thicker, voices brighter, the edges of the world blurring into motion and noise. She kept her pace steady, Ranger alert but unhurried. Every movement a quiet assertion, I am still here. Passing the old church on Maple, Haley caught sight of a mural, colors faded but still vibrant, a collage of faces and names, flowers winding up toward a painted sky. Ranger stopped, sniffed the base of the wall, then lifted his gaze to her. She traced her finger over the chipped tiles, reading the dedication beneath. For those who watched over us, and those still lost. There were stories everywhere in this city, in the cracks on the sidewalk, in the hum of late buses, in the gentle tilt of Ranger's head as he paused to listen. Stories of what was endured, what was carried, and what, quietly, might yet be found. It was nearly dark when Haley turned toward home, the neighborhood settling again into its evening hush. Ranger's stride slowed as they neared their street, his body relaxing, posture softening with the promise of warmth and safety ahead. Haley felt the weight of her exhaustion, but also the small pulse of hope that grew brighter in Ranger's company. At their door she paused, looking back at the city. Lights flickered on behind curtains. Laughter floated from an open window. In the distance, a dog barked, answered by another across the block. Haley smiled, brief and quiet, and reached down to unclip Ranger's leash. He looked up at her, tail wagging just once, as if to say, "We made it through another day." Inside, the hush welcomed them. Night pressed against the windows, but inside there was warmth, companionship, and the promise of rest. And outside, beyond the circle of their small world, Harbor City kept breathing, wounded, watchful, and against all odds, still alive. The city was different at night, a labyrinth of shadow and light, each street humming with secrets that never quite faded, only slipped from view until someone cared enough to look. Haley lay awake long after midnight, listening to the rise and fall of Ranger's breath, the steady tick of the wall clock, the hush that pressed close in the dark. The storm had passed, but the air was restless, stirring with an energy that seemed to linger long after the world had gone quiet. She drifted in and out of shallow sleep, dreams fractured by memories, the trembling hands of the rescued children, the flash of blue lights reflected in rain, Ranger's weight beside her as she bent to check for a pulse. always searching for life in places no one else bothered to search. Sometimes she thought the worst ache wasn't from bruises or exhaustion, but from the knowledge that her own need, to rescue, to save, came from a wound she still couldn't name. Ranger stirred before dawn, his paws scrabbling lightly against the floor. He padded to the window, tail low, body tense, ears pricked toward something unseen. Haley sat up, heart quickening, the old instinct rising, a readiness that never truly faded. She moved to the window, stood behind him. Outside, the street was empty except for the rustle of wind in the hedges and the glow of the corner street lamp. But Ranger's gaze was fixed, unblinking, on the darkness at the edge of the block. A moment later, a car rolled past, headlights glancing off rain-wet asphalt. It was nothing, she told herself. Still, she found her shoes, shrugged into her jacket, and checked the lock on the door. Ranger watched, quiet and alert, as she moved through the house, turning off lights, setting a mug in the sink. There was a heaviness in the air, as if the past itself might walk up the steps and ring the bell. The call came just after sunrise. Dispatch, static-laced, weary. "Detective Cooper, please respond." Haley pressed the receiver close, voice hoarse with sleep. "Go ahead." "We've got a break-in at the old rec center. Possible witness reported seeing a large dog with a man in a gray hoodie heading north. Units en route, but the witness says the dog looked hurt or scared." A pause. "Just thought you should know." Haley's hands moved before her mind could catch up. Boots, keys, the leash. She clipped it to Ranger's collar, met his gaze. He was ready, as always. Outside, the city was waking, buses grumbling down side streets, bakery doors propped open to let out the smell of cinnamon and flour, tired faces waiting for coffee in neon-lit diners. None of it felt quite real. Not yet. Not until she turned north. Not until she saw the gathering crowd at the rec center. Yellow tape fluttering in the breeze. The rec center sat hunched in the shadow of the overpass, a relic from another decade. Peeling paint, boarded windows, old murals ghosting the bricks. Haley moved through the crowd with Ranger tight at her side, eyes scanning for the familiar and the dangerous. She found Officer Myers, posture stiff beneath his windbreaker, jaw clenched in a way that said he'd been awake all night. "Witness says the guy was rough with the dog. Dragged him inside." He paused. "Dog was a shepherd. Looked like he'd been on the street a while." Haley felt a cold certainty settle in her bones. She pressed forward. The front doors hung askew, glass cracked from some long-ago riot. Inside, the air was stale. Old sweat, dust, the faint copper tang of something not quite right. Ranger's nose twitched. He pulled ahead, every sense lit with urgency. They found them in the far room, where sunlight filtered through shattered windows, striping the floor in gold and shadow. The man in the hoodie sat slumped against the wall, hands pressed to his face, breathing ragged. The dog, a shepherd, older, fur grizzled, one ear torn, lay on his side, ribs heaving, eyes dull with pain. The leash had been tied to an iron radiator. It was snapped now, frayed at the end. Haley knelt slowly, letting Ranger approach first. The two dogs sniffed, nose to nose, posture wary but gentle. The stranger, no badge, no home, watched with a kind of raw hope. His body hunched around the shepherd as if to shield him from the world. "Didn't mean for him to get hurt," he mumbled, voice thin as old paper. "Just needed somewhere warm. Just didn't want to leave him behind." Haley didn't answer, didn't scold or comfort. She saw too much of herself in the way the man held the shepherd, how he trembled when the dog tried to stand, how his hand shook as he stroked the battered fur. It was a moment without heroics, stripped of pride or shame. Only need, only love, and the quiet fear of losing what little remained. Ranger leaned in, touching his nose to the older dog's muzzle, a brief communion, silent and complete. Haley called for help, ambulance, animal control, backup, but stayed kneeling in the dust, feeling the weight of the morning settle over her shoulders. There was no clear line between rescue and survival, no easy ending. Just the certainty that she would do it all again, that she would keep showing up, keep opening doors, keep kneeling beside those who had nowhere else to go. The city outside went on, sirens echoing, sunlight warming the empty sidewalks, people moving past without seeing the small mercies unfolding in broken places. Haley closed her eyes, letting Ranger press close, letting the silence fill with all the things she could never say. Sometimes the past did come knocking. Sometimes it brought only pain, sometimes a second chance. And sometimes, just sometimes, it brought someone, or something, back home. Evening brought a pale, moody light to Harbor City. The rec center's parking lot was nearly empty. The crowd dispersed, yellow tape shivering in the breeze. Haley leaned against her cruiser, arms crossed, watching the paramedics work, one tending to the battered shepherd, the other to the man in the hoodie who sat on the curb, shivering despite the mild air. Ranger stood nearby, silent, vigilant. His gaze shifting from the stranger's dog to Haley, as if trying to parse the boundary between what could be saved and what could only be witnessed. The city behind them moved on, the distant pulse of hip-hop from a passing car, the clatter of skateboards in the street, a toddler's wail from a nearby apartment window. Ordinary sounds, but tonight they felt distant, as if the world itself had turned down its volume to leave space for something else. Haley's mind replayed the morning's events in fragments, the echo of Ranger's claws on the kitchen floor, the flicker of the dispatcher's voice, the moment she'd seen the old shepherd, ribs sharp against his skin, and something in her chest had twisted with an ache she couldn't name. She'd seen too many nights end badly for people with nowhere to go. It was never as simple as calling for help, never as easy as dropping someone at a shelter and moving on. A light rain began to fall, misting the asphalt and leaving beads of water clinging to the cruiser's hood. Haley opened the rear door for Ranger, but he lingered by the other shepherd, lowering his head, tail low, stance gentle, something almost reverent in the quiet way he waited. The battered dog looked up, blinked slowly, and for a moment Haley saw a flicker of the animal he must once have been. Proud, attentive, trusting. The paramedics loaded the man and his dog into separate vans. No one made a scene. There were no goodbyes, just a handful of nods and a silence that seemed to press in around all of them. Haley watched until the last taillight disappeared around the corner, then slid behind the wheel. Ranger jumped up beside her, shaking rain from his fur. She started the engine, the familiar hum grounding her, pulling her back into the rhythm of the city's pulse. Driving home, Haley felt the fatigue settle in her limbs, heavier than usual. She passed the mural on Maple, its colors blurring in the mist, and for a fleeting moment she wished she could step into that painted world, become one of the figures forever gazing skyward, untouched by disappointment or grief. But the world was here, messy, unfinished, full of stray dogs and strangers' sorrow. Here was where she belonged. That night, the quiet returned. Haley showered, changed into sweats, and padded barefoot through the house, windows open to the soft patter of rain. Ranger lay sprawled on the living room rug, his breaths deep and even, his body stretching from one patch of lamplight to the next. For a long time, Haley sat beside him in silence, the kind of silence that didn't ask for words, didn't need explanation. Memories rose. The little girl clutching Ranger's leash in the alley, the way the man in the hoodie had held his shepherd, fingers white-knuckled with fear and love, the way Ranger had leaned against her in the aftermath, steady as stone. She felt again the thinness of the line that separated strangers from kin, danger from mercy, what could be lost and what, miraculously, might be found. Later, sleep proved elusive. Haley found herself pacing the kitchen, moonlight pooling on the linoleum, the clock's hands marching stubbornly toward midnight. She brewed chamomile tea, let the steam warm her face, watched as Ranger stretched and settled at her feet. His presence was a kind of tether, anchoring her to the quiet moments when the city, for all its brokenness, felt safe. A text came from the station. The old shepherd would be transferred to the city's only animal hospital. The man in the hoodie had given no address, only a first name and a plea to see his dog again when he could. Haley read the message twice, thinking of all the times someone had tried to start over with nothing but hope and a name. She knelt, her hand resting lightly on Ranger's back. In the hush, she felt his heart beneath her palm, steady, unwavering. They had rescued others, yes, but in so many ways, it was this ritual of returning to each other that rescued her most. Rain turned to fog, silvering the world outside, making every light seem softer, every shadow less threatening. Haley returned to the living room, curled on the sofa with Ranger pressed close, both of them watching the city's quiet flicker through the window. She listened to the sounds that drifted in, the distant bark of a dog, the creak of a neighbor's porch swing, the steady rhythm of her own breath blending with Ranger's. The line between loneliness and connection was thin, often crossed and recrossed without warning. But tonight, in the hush after rescue, with the world pared down to the pulse of one heart beside another, Haley felt the ache of loss loosen its grip. Just enough to let in something quieter, something like peace. Some nights, that was all the world offered. And for a woman and her dog, both marked by what they'd seen and saved, it was more than enough. Rain lingered all through the night, drumming out an uneven rhythm that settled deep into the bones of Harbor City. By morning, the sky broke open, soft gray, low and bruised, shedding a mist that clung to window panes and telephone wires. Haley awoke before sunrise, her sleep restless, mind clouded by the memory of the stranger and his shepherd. The way need and devotion echoed between their battered bodies in that broken room. Ranger was up before her, silent as a shadow, already watching the back door as if he could feel the shape of the day ahead. When she let him out, he moved slow, head low, every muscle carrying a hush that hadn't lifted since the night before. There was a tightness in the air, an intuition that today would bring the city's hidden troubles out of the cracks, that something had shifted just beneath the surface, waiting to be seen. Haley poured herself coffee, hands steady by force of habit. She checked her phone, a message blinking on the lock screen. Incident, 5th and Armitage. Need you in. No details, just the clipped cadence of a city that never fully slept. She dressed in silence, her routine a kind of armor, Ranger following her every move, the leash already out before she called for him. Outside, the world felt raw and rinsed. Sirens called in the distance, then faded. Neighbors swept water from their stoops, eyes down, shoulders hunched against whatever news the day would bring. Haley and Ranger moved down the street at a quick stride. No conversation, only the slap of her boots in puddles and the steady breath of her partner at her side. At 5th and Armitage, 2 patrol cars blocked the intersection. Officers stood in a loose circle, faces grave, voices hushed. Haley approached, badge flashing beneath her rain jacket. The senior officer, a broad man with kind eyes gone tight from lack of sleep, motioned her over. "It's a bad one," he murmured. "Animal control called us out. Found another shepherd, abandoned, tied behind the dumpsters. Looks like someone roughed him up pretty bad. Could be linked to last night." Haley's heart sank. She glanced at Ranger. His ears twitched, body straining forward, already reading the scent in the air. Fear, pain, a desperate plea that lingered even after the source was gone. Around the corner, an officer knelt by the injured dog, a gentle hand on its side. The animal trembled, ribs sharp, a patch of fur torn from its flank. Its eyes flickered from the humans to Ranger, uncertain but searching for something it recognized. Haley crouched low, letting Ranger lead the way, her voice soft, wordless. The injured dog sniffed Ranger, head dropping in submission. For a moment, neither barked nor whimpered, just the long, silent negotiation between creatures who'd learned too much about loss. She saw the bond take hold, fragile but real, as Ranger licked the shepherd's muzzle, a single, patient gesture that said, "I see you." Animal control lifted the dog gently onto a stretcher, whispering reassurances. Haley asked for a few minutes alone, and the others stepped away. Kneeling in the puddled alley, she pressed her palm to the shepherd's side. Its breathing slowed under her touch. She watched Ranger settle beside the stretcher, refusing to move even as the team prepared to leave. "He'll stay with you," Haley told the dog. "You're not alone." The rain blurred her vision. She wiped at her eyes but made no move to hide it. The rest of the shift passed in a daze. Reports filed, calls answered, the city's demands unending. But through every hour, Haley's mind drifted back to the alley and the look in the shepherd's eyes. At lunch, she drove to the animal hospital. Ranger trotted beside her, his stride purposeful, as if he understood the mission was unfinished. Inside the clinic, the stranger from the rec center sat hunched in a plastic chair, head in his hands. Haley stood by the doorway, waiting, giving him space. When he looked up, his eyes were red, face drawn and young in a way that made her heart ache. "They said I can't see him yet," he whispered. "They're not sure if he'll, make it." Haley nodded, then sat beside him, Ranger at her feet. No advice, no empty comfort, just a hand resting on his shoulder. The weight of presence instead of words. Minutes passed, then an hour. Finally, a vet tech appeared, motioning them in. The battered shepherd lay on a blanket, IV taped to one paw, eyes cloudy but alert. When the stranger stepped forward, the dog struggled upright, tail thumping once against the metal table. The man choked out a sob, knelt, and pressed his face to the dog's fur. Ranger watched, his head cocked, then lay down nearby, the quiet guardian of this reunion. Haley stayed back, feeling both like an intruder and a witness, someone who knew the power and the cost of these small, fierce connections. The stranger murmured thanks through tears, not to her, not even to the staff, but to his dog, and to whatever grace had led them back together. Later, as dusk crept in, Haley and Ranger walked home along wet sidewalks, shimmering gold under streetlights. She let her hand rest on Ranger's back, feeling the steady strength of him, the loyalty that had never asked for reward. In the hush between heartbeats, she realized the city's ache had shifted inside her too, not gone but softer, made bearable by the presence at her side. Sometimes rescue wasn't dramatic. Sometimes it was slow, gentle, a long waiting in the rain. Sometimes it was simply refusing to turn away, even when there was nothing left to promise except, "I'm here. I see you. I will not leave you behind." Tonight, for a while, that was enough. Night settled over Harbor City in a hush thick with memories, the kind of quiet that revealed more than it concealed. Apartment lights flickered on, casting rectangles of gold onto the wet street below. The hospital parking lot was nearly empty, and the city's pulse slowed, leaving only the distant wash of cars and the soft shuffle of nurses changing shifts. Haley lingered just outside the glass doors, feeling the day's exhaustion settle into her shoulders, a weight as familiar as breath. Ranger pressed against her side, his presence steady, his warmth grounding her in the moment. It was a ritual now, these quiet moments after chaos, when words ran dry and only the rhythm of a loyal heart could fill the space left behind by everything unspoken. Inside, the stranger sat in the pool of fluorescent light, one hand resting on the battered shepherd's flank. The dog's chest rose and fell, a little stronger now, his eyes no longer clouded by pain. The man whispered softly, a broken thread of gratitude and apology. Haley didn't intrude. She watched through the window, recalling the curve of the little girl's hands on Ranger's leash, the hollow echo in her own chest, when she let herself remember the people and animals who had slipped away before anyone could reach them. There was an ache in this kind of witness, a humility in staying present for suffering you could not erase. In the quiet, she saw again how trauma and hope lived side by side, how people and dogs carried what they must, and how sometimes, if only for a heartbeat, they could set the burden down and rest. A nurse came to the door and spoke in a voice as gentle as the hour. "You can go in now," she said. Haley entered, Ranger at her side, the hospital's antiseptic chill sharp after the soft fog outside. She sat in the extra chair, her movements slow, careful not to startle anyone. The man, his name was Owen, she finally learned, looked up with eyes rimmed red but clear. He didn't explain how he'd come to lose everything, how the shepherd had been the last thread to a life that had unraveled years before. He didn't need to. The story was there in the gentle way he stroked the dog's ear, in the way his shoulders dropped just a little now that someone else was willing to bear witness. Ranger settled near the shepherd, pressing his nose gently to the old dog's paw. It was a small act, but one that seemed to pull Owen back from some invisible edge. He let out a breath, heavy with relief. Haley listened to the hum of the IV pump, the soft rustle of paperwork in the hall. The world outside grew more distant with each minute. Owen spoke, halting, tracing memories as if afraid they might break if spoken too loud. "He was there when my wife left," he said. "He was the reason I kept trying, even when it all fell apart. I'm not much good at anything, but he always came back to me." He looked at Haley, searching for judgment, but found only the patience that comes from understanding. "I thought I lost him last night, and I realized I didn't have anyone else to call." Haley nodded, her voice low. "Sometimes, it's not about fixing anything. Sometimes, it's just not turning away." Ranger leaned into her, as if to second the thought. The battered shepherd looked from human to dog, then back, and for a while the silence was its own kind of healing. As the night deepened, Owen drifted to sleep, his hand resting in the shepherd's fur. Haley rose quietly, nodding to the nurse as she and Ranger stepped back into the hall. They moved through the hospital's hush, past the quiet offices and the sleeping city beyond. The air smelled of cleaning fluid and rain-soaked pavement, a strange comfort, marking the boundary between suffering and recovery. They walked home beneath the sparse light of street lamps. Ranger's stride sure, Haley's body heavy, but heart somehow lighter. Each step was a reminder that sometimes, in this city of wounds and wonders, simply enduring was enough. She thought about what people chose to carry, the weight of regret, the hope of reunion, the small, silent griefs that lived in every home and alley. At her door, Haley paused, looking back at the city with new eyes. She saw it not just as a tangle of struggle and sorrow, but as a patchwork of small mercies, an old woman's bowl of water, a mural bright against the dusk. The way Ranger pressed close when she couldn't find words for what she felt. Inside, she hung her jacket, set her boots by the radiator, and watched Ranger circle his favorite spot by the window. He turned twice, lay down with a sigh, and closed his eyes, one ear always half-cocked for the world's next need. Haley sat beside him, hand in his fur, breathing in the quiet. In the morning, she would return to the city's demands, its noise and need. But tonight, in the soft hush between storms, she let herself believe that presence, steady, faithful, never demanding, could be enough to mend the world. 1 hour, one stranger, one scarred heart at a time. Sometimes what we chose to carry was heavy, but sometimes, if we were lucky, we didn't have to carry it alone. Morning crept softly into Harbor City, the kind of morning that left puddles glittering in the first gold and coaxed small children out onto stoops to look for worms. Haley lay half awake, the blanket tangled at her feet. Ranger already dozing in a shaft of sun by the window, his breathing calm and deep. The city felt new again, not because anything dramatic had changed, but because, for the first time in a long while, she felt a hush inside that didn't ache. She rose slowly, making coffee with hands still heavy from yesterday's sorrow and relief. Through the kitchen window, she watched neighbors, Mrs. Reed watering her window box, the school custodian rolling his trash bin down the street, 2 boys pedaling bikes with mismatched wheels and laughter spilling after them. Ordinary life, stubborn in its persistence. Ranger's tags jingled as he stretched, rose, and padded over, pressing his head into her palm. She rubbed his ears and let her gratitude live in the gesture. No words needed. Some mornings, the city's troubles seemed far off, like thunder rolling somewhere else, unable to breach the fragile peace of a sunlit kitchen. After breakfast, Haley slipped on her jacket, feeling the shape of her badge in the pocket, its meaning different now. Ranger watched as she laced her boots, his gaze patient, already understanding they would be out in the world again soon. She lingered a moment longer in the doorway, letting her eyes wander the small, cluttered space she called home. Sometimes safety was not a fortress, but a habit, a ritual built one careful day at a time. At the hospital, she found Owen waiting just outside the glass doors, the battered shepherd, bandit, she learned finally. Leaning into his leg, eyes bright, wounds healing, the man looked younger in the daylight, or perhaps simply less alone. Haley joined them without fanfare, Ranger trotting forward, tail wagging once as Bandit sniffed his nose, then rested his head against Ranger's neck. They stood together in the weak sunlight, 3 people and 2 dogs, and let the city swirl on around them. There was talk of what might come next. A temporary shelter bed for Owen and Bandit, an appointment with the local outreach team, a promise from Haley to check in, to not let them vanish into the city's blind spots again. The words were practical, but something more important passed between them, an understanding that presence itself, the simple act of not looking away, could be enough to hold a life together for another day. The morning drifted into afternoon. Haley drove Ranger out past the city's edge, where grass rose tall along the riverbank, and the only sound was wind in the weeds. She let him off leash and watched as he tore across the open field, limber, powerful, moving with a kind of joy she rarely saw in herself. She sat on the hood of her car, arms wrapped around her knees, face lifted to the sky. It felt like a prayer, though she'd never been sure who was listening. Later, back home, she bathed Ranger, warm water running over the notched scar on his ear, his tail thumping the side of the tub. She dried him with a towel, both of them silent, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Evening light spilled across the floor as she cooked a simple dinner, the radio murmuring old songs in the background. When she dropped a piece of chicken, Ranger sat back, politely waiting for her to offer it instead of snatching. She smiled, feeling something loosen in her chest. Night fell gently. The city outside faded to hush, only the sound of rain in the gutters and the occasional shudder of the refrigerator. Haley sat at the kitchen table, the window cracked open to let in the scent of wet earth and lilac. Ranger circled once, twice, and settled at her feet, chin resting on her shoe. She finished her tea and let the quiet do its work. She thought about the children rescued in the alley, about Owen and Bandit, about the women at the shelter, the old man with the produce truck, the mural with names that hadn't faded, all the lives and losses, the hurt that never fully healed, but dulled over time, made lighter by hands, human and canine, that chose to stay. She knew the world would not stop needing, would not stop breaking, but for tonight, in the hush between demands, she could believe in the worth of small mercies. She could honor the way Ranger watched the door, the way he leaned into her hand, the way he'd taught her to keep showing up again and again, even when rescue looked like little more than quiet, patient company. At midnight, she stood in the doorway, watching the rain sweep the street. The city was sleeping, except for the handful of souls, nurses on their rounds, drivers finishing late shifts, lost ones looking for a place to rest, moving through the dark, watched over by loyal eyes in kitchens and on porches, dogs keeping vigil in the silent hours. Haley pressed her palm to Ranger's neck, feeling the steady pulse beneath the fur. She breathed in the certainty of his presence, the home they'd built in defiance of all the world's indifference. She understood, at last, what it meant to carry on, not because the city had been mended, but because they had refused to let anyone, even themselves, disappear into the night alone. In the end, the story was not about saving or being saved, not about perfection or answers. It was about staying, about the quiet that remains when the world grows still, and about the hearts, human and animal, that keep loving in the darkness again and again. And that, she knew, was enough.